Well, Colonel, there she is, the P-51B.
Looks like the old Mustang, doesn't she?
Yes, much of the construction is exactly the same. But Mr. Deitch, using the same basic design as the P-51A, has built a ship that'll fight from 25,000 feet on up.
That's the new engine, eh?
That's the Rolls-Merlin 61, built by Packard. It's a 12-cylinder job like the Allison and the P-51A.
But it packs a military rating of 1,520 horsepower and a war emergency rating of 1,630 horsepower. And a two-stage supercharger. This two-stage blower and external fuel tanks mean it can serve as a high-altitude escort fighter for long-range bombers, besides doubling as a low-altitude fighter, dive, or low-level bomber. And with 150-gallon ferrying tanks under each wing, your pilots will be hopping the Atlantic pretty soon without too much trouble.
And we're putting an 85-gallon tank in the fuselage, back of the pilot seat.
Now, these tanks, or the bombs, these are dummies, of course, go in these racks on each side, as you know. Without these racks, the plane has 15 miles per hour more top speed.
But this ship is faster than the old model, even with the racks on. And we're swinging a four-bladed prop to absorb the extra power.
It's a Hamilton hydromatic constant speed job with cups.
Now, we're using the same laminar flow airfoil as before. That made the Mustang such a fast ship. And, this is a newly designed aileron that gives the ship an extremely fast rate of roll. We call it the sealed balance type. I have a diagram here that illustrates how this aileron works. Now, the normal aileron looks like this.
When the aileron moves up into the airflow, air leaks through the space between the aileron and the wing. That's where a lot of the force applied to the stick is wasted. But our sealed balance aileron lessens to a great extent the force required, because the part of the airflow that formerly escaped can no longer do so. The cloth connection stops it.
Therefore, this airflow, which formerly escaped, exerts a force down on the airtight cloth, which in turn enables the pilot to force the wing down with much less effort.
You don't have to tell me why that's important in lining up those 450s there on a Messerschmitt or a Focke-Wulf.
We have a pretty insulation on those guns. Let's take a look at them. Sam. Give me a hand with these access doors here.
I want you to notice how we laid the guns on the side to eliminate any bulge in the airfoil. We're using a simplified mounting that allows removal in a few seconds.
What about the guns the Jerrys and the Japs are packing? What kind of protection does the pilot have from enemy gunfire?
Well, let's take a look at the sketches, shall we? We'll show you. Here we are.
The P-51B is equipped with face-hardened steel armor plating and an armor glass windshield. This affords protection for the pilot from bullets hitting within this area. We've also protected the coolant tank in the nose from frontal attack. In other words, in flight you get these cones of protection from enemy bullets.
Which should be comforting news to the pilot.
Well, personally, I think it's a good idea to get rid of the enemy before he has a chance to try the armor plating.
You've got something there, Major. Arthur, let's stop shooting the breeze and get this ship off the ground.
Okay, Bob. Colonel, if you'll join me in the control tower, we'll have grandstand seats.
Right. See you later, children.
Right, sir.
Bob will give a continuous radio report on everything he does in this plane which might deviate from normal pilot procedure, even if it's scratching his ear in the middle of a loop.
Hello, Mr. Dees.
Oh, Charlie, these are the gentlemen I called you about. Colonel, let's get over to where we can see things. Ah, there's Bob.
Now you notice he gets in the plane from the rear, and flaps are kept down to prevent anyone stepping on them. Now, Bob, before he gets into the cockpit, checks the Zeus buttons on the radio compartment panels. Once inside the cockpit, he gets comfortable, adjusts the rudder pedals, gets his shoulder harness set. Well, they should be ready by now. Charlie, let's give them a call.
Okay, Mr. Dees. Hello, Army 115. This is Mines Tower. The air's all yours, Bob. Nothing expected for the next hour. Over.
Hello, Mines Tower. This is Army 115. Well, here's where I start the monologue. Hope your ears can take it. I've checked the servicing of the ship to have an idea of the amount of load I'm carrying.
Rate of climb can vary as much as 500 feet a minute, depending on the load.
I close the cockpit enclosure by first pulling the left side into position, then lowering the upper portion. And I make sure the enclosure handle is locked in place with a safety latch, and rear hatch and felt molding is checked.
He checks to see that the warning pins in the right sliding track are down.
Pins checked. Starting the regular before starting engine check.
Oh, by the way, if you were going to make an engine run up on the ground, especially pulling more than 40 inches of manifold pressure, be sure that the tail of the P-51B is anchored securely, and that the flaps are kept up. You see, the weight of the new Rolls-Royce engine has moved the center of gravity forward. As a result, the slipstream from the prop is liable to force the tail up.
During my regular check, I make sure that the emergency boost control is in automatic, as I'm only to use it in case of war emergency for not more than 5 minutes at a time. Making sure supercharger control in automatic and not in low. Coolant and oil switches checked in automatic. Fuel booster pump on normal. Finish check, starting engine. Clear.
The fuel booster pump draws from whatever tank the selector is on. We tried to cut down on the number of things a pilot has to do. That's why the ship has an automatic manifold pressure regulator connected to the throttle. But the pilot will have to be careful under icing conditions, because the automatic regulator will try to compensate until the carburetor is completely iced up. May I have the microphone, please, Colonel? Are you ready, Bob?
She's warmed up, ready for taxi. Here I go. The attitude of this ship makes ground visibility very poor. So S-ing is necessary even more than in most airplanes with a conventional type landing gear. In order to save the brakes, use the steerable tail wheel feature. If I hold the stick at neutral, or slightly aft of neutral, the tail wheel is steerable 6 degrees on each side. All I have to do is move the rudder pedal. The 6-degree steering feature doesn't allow sharp turns. In order to make one, I simply push the stick forward. The tail wheel unlocks and becomes full swiveling. However, excessive throttle or excessive use of brakes with the stick forward should be avoided to prevent nosing over. Making regular cockpit check. If in doubt, use the checklist. Every Army plane's got one. Flaps up. Coolers open. Trim tabs, 7 degrees, right rudder trim. Note that I switched the fuel booster pump to emergency. The pump draws from whichever tank the selector is on. Instruments, okay. Switches on main panel, okay. Checking oxygen gauge. Switches right panel, okay. Gas tanks, full. Running up engine, checking mags. Now, I use no flaps normally for takeoff, but if I were carrying bombs or external tanks, I might use them. So to show the operation, I'll use them this time. The best settings, 20 degrees flaps and 6 degrees tail heavy on the elevators, as the plane will get off more quickly and give a greater feeling of control that way. The manifold pressure can be used as you need it up to 61 inches. The propeller control is fully forward for the maximum RPM of 3,000. Taking off. Keeping the tail on the ground and use of rudder trim, as I said before, counteracts normal torque action on takeoff. A bit of back pressure on the stick has to be used to keep the tail down. Landing gear up. Here come the flaps. Practically no settling when they're raised. Fuel booster pump in normal. The plane feels normal now that it's off the ground. I'm heading upstairs.
Let's get a pair of binoculars so we can see what's going on, Colonel. There's a pair, Major.
Thank you. "20,000 feet. The supercharger just changed over in a high blower. A jump seems to occur in the engine, then the manifold pressure returns to its original setting. It switches at an altitude of between 20,000 and 20,500 feet. Heading on upstairs. "25,000 feet. I've leveled off."
Hello, Chilton.
Hello?
How is she on directional trim changes when speed and horsepower are varied?
I'll throttle back and give it a whirl. The airplane is stable at all normal loadings, but the directional trim changes at low speeds as horsepower and speed is varied. However, the rudder tab corrects this effectively with only a slight adjustment, and it should be used as necessary. Normally, there is no trouble as the plane is naturally stable.
That means the P-51B will remain at any altitude without adjusting the trim tabs.
Less work for the pilot.
Now I'm going to show her stalling characteristics. The stall is comparatively mild and occurs at approximately 95 miles per hour indicated with gear and flaps up. About 3 or 4 miles above this stalling speed, a slight elevator buffet occurs. Plane sinks a distance, then rolls over on one wing. It doesn't whip over as some other planes do and has very little tendency to drop into a spin. The recovery is completely normal. All that has to be done is to release the back pressure on the stick and apply opposite rudder. With the gear and flaps down, the stall would have the same characteristics as before, only it occurs at about 85 miles per hour indicated.
Naturally, with combat tanks or bombs making an extra load, the stalling speeds are higher.
I'll run to an accelerated stall. A heavy buffet occurs around the wing root fillet and the horizontal stabilizer 3 or 4 miles per hour above actual stalling speed, but the plane recovers immediately by releasing pressure on the stick. The accelerated stall has stronger warning characteristics than a normal stall.
Hello, Bob. Show us a couple of dives.
Okay, Colonel. Here she goes. Plane gains speed extremely fast in a dive. Tends to veer slightly to the right and continue in a dive without pulling itself out for quite a long time.
The propeller doesn't overrun during the dive, does it?
Not a bit. I put it at 3,000 RPM and it stayed nailed there. Any other questions, sir?
No, thanks. How about doing a couple of rolls for us?
Here's one to the left. Rate of roll is extremely fast, especially at high speeds.
That's due to the seal balanced aileron. It's the final result of 14 different designs.
That fast roll really counts, too.
Yes, that means the pilot can disengage the enemy a lot quicker.
We believe the only enemy ship that can approach it for speed of roll is a Focke-Wulf 190.
Here's another dive. In the dive, the pilot doesn't have to maintain excessive forward pressure on the stick. Catch the slight tendency to veer to the right with a trim tab, if in a prolonged dive. Otherwise, the ship is positively stable in the dive. Hello, Arthur. I'm going up to high altitude and put her in a maximum speed dive to show you how fast you'll go before reaching compressibility.
Okay, Bob, let us know when you're up there.
Roger.
Now then, while Bob's climbing, there are some points that might interest you, gentlemen. Let's sit down, shall we? Colonel?
Thank you.
As you know, the true speed of a plane at the time compressibility occurs, divided by the speed of sound at that altitude, gives us a figure called the Mach number. So named after the man who discovered the relationship. Let's take an example. We'll say the plane reached compressibility at 560 miles per hour. That's true airspeed at 10,000 feet altitude. Dividing this speed by 724, the speed of sound at 10,000 feet, we get, and gentlemen, we've done this arithmetic many times before, 0.76, the Mach number. Now that number indicates the speed a plane can dive at any given altitude. The higher the Mach number, the faster the plane can dive without encountering compressibility trouble. We believe the P-51B has the highest Mach number of any fighter. Now, there's a point I'd like to make to pilots about getting into compressibility, but first a little more dope. The Mach number of any given ship remains the same no matter what the altitude. But the speed of sound decreases at high altitudes. So, the higher the altitude, the less speed required to get into compressibility. Let's get back to our problem. Suppose we were at 30,000 feet. Then X, the speed we could go, divided by the decreased speed of sound at that altitude, 680 miles per hour, equals the Mach number, 0.76. Solving, we find that we could go only 517 miles per hour before getting compressibility. One more thing. The higher the altitude, the faster the true speed for any given indicated speed, and as I said, the lower true speed required to reach compressibility. So, here's the point, and it's an important one. The pilot should remember that at high altitudes, he reaches compressibility at much lower indicated speeds than at low altitudes. At any rate, observe the speed limitations posted in the cockpit.
38,000. Are you all set down there?
I guess we're all set. We had enough theory for the moment, anyhow. Major, should we let them know we're still down here?
Right. Hello, Bob. We're all set down here. You really going to wind her up for us?
Just you hold on to your hat, Major.
Okay. Give us your indicated speed and how she acts when you get her into compressibility, will you?
Roger. I'll be down in a minute. $300, $350, $400, $440. Compressibility. Stick moving fore and aft. Slight elevator overbalance. Heavy buffeting on tail section. Oscillation occurs rapidly. However, control forces on elevators remain unchanged. Plane hunts slightly along horizontal axis. Pulling out now. No difficulty, except buffeting continues until a lower speed has been reached.
440 indicated at that height. That's really moving.
Enemy fighters will have a hell of a time trying to keep up with this ship in a dive.
They really would, Colonel.
I'm going to try a couple of spins. I'll do a right spin first. Here she goes. In a right spin, there is a continuous oscillation. A slight rudder buffet is present. Procedure for recovery completely normal. No trouble getting out of the spin.
Probably try one to the left now.
For 3 turns, an oscillation is present as in the right spin. Then the spin becomes stable. Recovery is the same. Full opposite rudder, then stick in neutral. Going into a sustained side slip. Couldn't hold it. I'll do another. The plane will not hold a sustained side slip. The aileron control is insufficient to hold it on a side-slipping angle. The ship automatically tends to straighten out.
However, it will side slip long enough to avoid enemy fire.
What about prohibitive maneuvers? The usual limitations?
Right. No snap rolls, inverted spins, or outside loops.
Hello, Bob. How about some aerobatics?
Roger. Here's a loop. Immelman. Here's a climbing roll. At high cruise, this airplane will even do a loop or Immelman from level flight position.
With the external fuel tanks or bombs installed, acrobatic maneuvers are prohibited. Also, every pilot should be warned not to fly inverted for more than 10 seconds. In that position, the scavenger pump fails to operate and oil pressure drops.
Going to buzz the field, Colonel. Want you to watch this for speed.
Here he comes.
And watch this.
Like a bat out of hell. Boy, that was beautiful.
Anything else I can show you while I'm up here?
That was beautiful, Bob.
Thanks, Colonel. I'll show you her gliding characteristics. I'll make a glide approach before landing.
Right.
Let's move over to where we can watch them come around. You show your power-off glide first. The ship is designed so it can glide any safe speed down to a margin of about 25% above stalling speed. With the gear and flaps up, the glide is fairly flat. The nose being high makes forward visibility poor. Now, if you'd lower either the landing gear or the flaps or both, you'd greatly steepen the gliding angle and increase the rate of descent.
Hello, Mines Tower. This is Army 115. Request landing instructions. Over.
Hello, Army 115. This is Mines Tower. You're clear to land, Bob. Use runway 25. Over.
Roger. Out. Making normal pre-landing cockpit check. Checking that fuel selector in on fullest tanks. Propeller control at 2,500 RPM. This setting gives a margin to apply power in case of a bad landing and helps prevent the engine from over-revving. There's a tendency to do that due to the flat position of the blades and lag of the pitch control mechanism. Mixture control in auto-rich. Oil and coolant radiator scoops in automatic. Lower the landing gear only below 170 indicated by pushing landing gear handle in down position. Make sure it's securely snapped so vibration won't jiggle it up. Adjust power and trim to maintain 150 indicated. When the airplane has been brought into the wind for landing, the flap should be lowered fully. But be sure the indicated is below 165. As soon as I turn into the field, I maintain gliding speed of around 115 with a normal whirl.
With a full load, including auxiliary ferrying tanks, the gliding speed is between 125 and 130.
Adjust the trim tab to assist in landing.
Beautiful landing.
You can land just as well crosswind. The wide landing gear and the lockable tail wheel make it safe. But as you know, never use more than half flaps. Well, let's go down to the line and talk to Bob. Thank you.
Well, how'd you like her, Colonel?
Nice show, Bob. Mr. Dietz, I think we've got something.
Thank you, sir.
Nice landing, Bob. But tell me, what happens if you make a bad one, if you bounce her in? Do you give her the gun and bring her around again, or do you just ease it in?
Well, if the attempt at landing is badly made so that the wing drops or you get a bad bounce, go around again. But don't slam the throttle open, because if you're too near stalling speed, engine torque will drive you right into the ground. You should ease the power on, get the nose down, and go around again. If at the last moment you decide not to make a landing, ease the throttle open, and when you reach an airspeed of about 110 and an altitude of about 300 feet, raise the flaps by degree, a notch at a time, after raising landing gear.
Tell me, what about engine failure during flight?
Engine failure during flight. Pull the emergency release handle of the cockpit enclosure so you won't be trapped inside in case it jams on landing. Lean forward when you do, because the hatch might clip you on the ear. Drop your external fuel tanks. And if there's time, lower the flaps. But remember, you've got to do it by hand because your hydraulic pressure is gone. Keep your landing gear retracted and land on the belly of the ship. It's no tea party, but you shouldn't have too much trouble. Oh, one more thing. Get away from the ship as quickly as possible, because the cockpit can get a little warm in case a fire starts.
Tell me, how does she behave on scramble takeoffs?
Oh, same as any other fighter. If she isn't warm, the oil has to be diluted enough to ensure proper oil pressure at moderate power. Then, as soon as the engine will take the throttle, just taxi out and take off. But apply the throttle slowly and steadily. Sudden application, as in any takeoff, causes the engine to cough and spit. How'd you like me to check you out on it, Major?
What are we waiting for?
Excuse me, Colonel. Gentlemen, that's the Army's improved version of the Mustang. A stronger, longer-range Mustang for high-altitude fighting. And today, thousands more are being made by workers on the production line for you on the fighting line.